lower your profile on the battlefield, and in most cases, hide you from enemy observation and direct fire. You could edge one side of it, so now you've got a hand axe, so you could, again, chop vegetation or small limbs, provide camouflage, and overhead roofing material for your foxhole. And normally what you'd expect to see is the longer an infantry unit stayed in the same place, the more elaborate and the higher level of protection the foxhole or the fighting position offered that soldier. Why do you think the shovel's important? Well, if you've looked at some of the footage of combat operations we had earlier conducted in Iraq or the ongoing combat ops in Afghanistan, you may have noticed the amount of body armor that our combat soldiers wear today. You know, the Kevlar helmet, full chest torso protective vest, groin protector, an extensive amount of body armor to protect that warfighter from an explosive device on the battlefield. Well, that's a recent phenomenon. The average soldier in World War II didn't have that benefit of technology. The extent of body armor you had available to you was your steel helmet. We were still using a World War I designed doughboy helmet at the beginning of World War II. But the problem with it was it set so high on the head that your temples and the nape of your neck were exposed to the effects of shrapnel created by an exploding hand grenade, a mortar round, artillery round, or even the debris kicked up by an explosion, you know, rocks or mud clods. If you are wounded in the temples or the nape of the neck by battlefield weapons, it's almost always fatal. So in 1941, we started issuing a new helmet to ensure that we did a better job of protecting those vulnerable head areas of the soldier. This was a two-piece helmet that had a removable fiber liner inside that, you know, if you were in the rear area, didn't need to wear a steel pot, you could still wear this. Keep the rain out of your face, keep the sun out of your face if you needed it. The helmet was made from a manganese hardened steel, which in addition to providing protection for your head, was commonly used as a cooking pot. You know, I've bathed out, washed out of them, soak a foot in it 1 foot at a time after a particularly bad day in the boonies. And again, just if you wash your feet or your body in it, just make sure you rinse it out before you fix supper that night. Make you a lot more popular with your buddies. Some of those helmets may have had a camouflage net on it where you could stick foliage in it to break up that unnatural outline. Some soldiers added a pair of goggles to protect their eyes against windborne debris. And then another item that we implemented for the D-Day invasion was the addition of that white stripe you see on the helmets. The vertical one on the right and the horizontal one on Brian's left were intended to be a passive battlefield leader identification system. Vertical for an officer, horizontal for a sergeant, intended to help the soldiers keep track of their leaders as they moved around on the battlefield. The round disc on the helmet in his right hand did the same thing at night. Well, you would think that small amount of white wouldn't be a big deal in a predominantly green background of vegetation, but it stood out in stark contrast, and it did not take the Germans very long to figure out what that white stripe meant. So in a very short time, German snipers began deliberately targeting the soldiers who wore those helmets. And the net result is when you take out the leadership of a unit, you basically render it ineffective. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it wasn't well thought out and had dangerous consequences, okay? Leaders also normally had a pair of binoculars so you could observe the battlefield, see what's going on, try to locate the enemy before he saw you. You'd probably also be carrying a compass and a map, primarily to navigate on the battlefield and keep your unit from getting lost. And we all know no military unit has ever been lost on the battlefield. And then if you were able to identify a enemy target, you could plot the location on the map, determine the direction, approximate a distance, so you can engage that enemy location with artillery or mortar fire, and then use your communication system to send that information. Okay. In World War II, the American Army was very lavishly equipped with reliable, state-of-the-art battlefield radios, and you saw them everywhere on the battlefield. This is a handy talkie because it can be used with one hand. You push the button down to talk, release to listen. There were radios that soldiers wore as backpacks. Jeeps, half-tracks, tanks all had radios, all the way up to the artillery spotter aircraft that flew around over the battlefield so they could call in artillery fire on German target. They were everywhere and they were very reliable. That's what I like to call the 1943 John Wayne cell phone. It was an AM radio with about a mile of range. This is what the sergeant or the lieutenant at the front line would talk to his company commander, the captain, on. And why that radio was such an important tool was that if you found yourself in a close knockdown, drag-out fight with an enemy force, you get on that radio and you could call your boss and ask for supporting fire that could be implemented into your battle very quickly, often much more rapidly than what the enemy could respond to and counter. And in a lot of cases, that was the difference in who was going to win that fight. Fortunately for us, we won more than we lost. What do we got next, Brian? Yeah, flashlight again. Most leaders carried flashlight with them because war is a 24-hour proposition. You're going to have to operate during darkness. We took a design from the Boy Scouts from the mid-30s, an angle-head flashlight, and started militarizing it. We made several improvements during the war, and this style of flashlight is still in use today in the military. It's just one of those ideas that wasn't significantly improvable, but it's been a good, reliable light. It had a clip on it so you could stick it on your gear, hands-free, look at a map, study it at night. The later version started coming with a series of colored filters, which you could use okay, red means this message on this day or night. Tomorrow it means something else. The later ones also had a spring button on it that if you knew Morse code, you could send messages with it, but that wasn't really a big thing in the Army. Okay, did I catch it? Okay, questions about uniforms and equipment that you may have? All right, how many World War II video gamers do we have in the group?
Be honest.
Yeah, Medal of Honor, Call of Duty. Yeah, there ought to be a couple of you here. Yeah, we always got a couple of girls. Got an alpha chick in the group on board. All right, let's talk about those weapons, or the primary tools the soldier needed on the battlefield to perform his job. We talked about sidearms. The most commonly carried handgun in the Army at this time, gamers, represented by this weapon. Anybody recognize it?
What is it?
Colt 45? Sound familiar?
We're both pretty deaf, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, shout it out.
This was a semi-automatic single-action automatic pistol. It had a 7-round magazine. Supplied the cartridges for it. And what I mean by single action is that in order to put a round in the chamber, cock the weapon, prepare it for firing, you had to manually charge the slide back. Now in this configuration, as long as I have ammunition, I can fire as fast as I pull the trigger. Magazine change was pretty quick. But the thing to keep in mind when you talk about handgun applications in a military environment is that it's a self-defense weapon of last resort. It's also very short range, very difficult to be good at unless you spend a lot of time on a range shooting. But it was a very effective weapon. It was our standard military handgun from its year of adoption, 1911. And that was one thing common about the weapons of the World War I period. The model number was normally the year it went into service. So 1911 is when this went into service, and it remained standard sidearm until the mid to late 1980s. We went to a 9mm, which now the circles come back around 30 years later. It took us that long to figure out, from a battlefield perspective, especially if the enemy forces got body armor, 9mm is not going to get it. 45 is twice the bullet weight, a lot more knockdown power. That's why we went to it in the beginning, was to ensure that what got hit went down. I equate it to a bowling ball. The cartridge does not fly very fast, about 850 feet a second. That isn't very impressive for a handgun cartridge. But it's like that bowling ball going down the alley. She may not be fast, but she's got lots of kinetic energy. You know, when you hit that lead kingpin with that ball, what's the usual outcome of that contact? Usually everything goes down. Same way with that 45. Usually one hit gets the job done. Another sidearm in use, and it was pretty popular with the cavalry. This also stemmed from World War I. 1917 revolver, large, heavy, robust cylinder handgun. It was double action, so you could fire it by pulling the trigger or cocking the hammer and then pulling the trigger. It fired the same 45 caliber cartridge that the pistol did, and that's one thing you should notice about most of these weapons. We didn't have much variation in the calibers that we used in our weapons, and that is very important when you talk about logistical resupply. But both of these were very reliable handguns. They take a lot of beating on the battlefield to still function. Well, in the 1930s, the American infantry was going through a transition in battle rifles. We began World War I with a weapon. Brian's going to go ahead and pull it now. We have any gamers that recognize this bolt-action rifle? Right. Yes, sir. It is, that's correct. It's a 1903 model Springfield rifle. It was an American adaptation of a German Mauser action. It was 30 caliber, which we standardized in the 1903-1906 time frame. And 30 caliber is nothing more than a military designation of the still very popular hunting caliber of 30-06. It had a 5-round internal magazine. You could load it one of two ways. You had a small metal clip called a stripper clip that held 5 cartridges together. Load the magazine, or if you wanted to, you could load them individually. For those of you who are not familiar with the functioning cycle of a bolt-action rifle, you put the cartridges in and you push the bolt forward and down, locks it in place, it cocks the weapon, and you have chambered a round. When you pull the trigger, now before you can fire again, you've got to reverse that process. Pulling the bolt to the rear ejects the empty cartridge, it recocks the weapon, and then it pushes the next round forward. Well, that doesn't allow you to generate a very fast rate of fire, obviously. But this is a very robust weapon. In fact, it was still in production until 1944, even though it had been superseded. And like most military weapons, it was intended to accommodate a bayonet. And those of the World War I era were usually pretty long, pretty nasty looking weapons. That one, I think, is about 2 body thicknesses long. But come on now, bayonet charges were pretty much a thing of the 19th century. The bayonet is still issued today, not so much as a weapon attachment, but more as another tool the soldier uses on the battlefield to get his job done. But a good accurate weapon, and still you'll find a lot of old guys with sportserized Springfields as hunting rifles today. Well, in 1936, with the adoption of a new battle rifle, the American infantryman became unique in comparison with his counterpart riflemen in other Allied or Axis armies with the adoption of this semi-automatic self-loading rifle. Gamers, what are we looking at? Roger, this is a rifle, comma, 30 caliber, comma, M1. Commonly referred to as the Garand, named after its designer, engineer, Canadian-born, John Garand, who worked at the Springfield Armory in Springfield, Massachusetts. This was also 30 caliber. You had 8 cartridges held together by a steel tension clip that was also inserted into an internal magazine. Once the bolt went forward and the weapon was loaded and cocked, now as fast as that rifleman could pull the trigger, you can generate a pretty high rate of firepower. 8 cartridge cases eject, the metal clip ejects, bolt lock to the rear, put another clip, repeat the process as often as needed. So out of that rifle squad, if they were full strength, you could expect to see about 10 to 11 of the soldiers armed with M1 rifles. Well, in a fight with a German rifle squad equipped with bolt-action rifles, it doesn't take a lot of math work to figure out who's likely to generate a higher rate of fire. The average American soldier who had received basic rifle marksmanship in the States before going to combat overseas, with this rifle could be a pretty accurate, deadly marksman out to about 500 yards without much effort. And also be able to fire 2 to 3 of those 8-round clips of well-aimed, accurate fire. It was probably the best battle rifle of the first half of the 20th century, bar none. Still in frontline service into the late 50s, and the National Guard Army Reserve still had them until about 1975. Again, like most military rifles, you can fix a variety of bayonets to this weapon. They get a little shorter as time goes forward. And again, not really that smart of a way to attack an enemy position. But still, bayonet on a weapon is pretty intimidating. Normally, one soldier in that rifle squad was a designated grenadier. With his M1, he was issued a clip-on grenade launcher at the end of the weapon, and using a special non-bullet tipped cartridge, kind of think of it as a high-powered blank, he could use one of a couple of different types of grenades and employ those on the battlefield out 200-300 yards, no problem. Ranges and distances much greater than you could ever think about throwing a hand grenade. Well, the 2 basic types, beginning with the one he's got on the weapon, was an exploding fragmentation anti-personnel grenade. The other rounded one is a light anti-armor grenade that was very effective against thin-skinned vehicles like half-tracks and armored cars. Not something you want to go after a tank with. It was not uncommon for an experienced grenadier who knew how to apply Kentucky windage, being able to put a grenade in a window of a building a couple hundred yards. That's a pretty significant option in the tactics and weapons your squad had available to engage the enemy. Huh? 2 minutes. Okay. All right, so next thing we're going to look at is what weapon we had in that squad provide mobile automatic firepower on the battlefield. Most other armies, Allied and Axis, starting in the mid-1930s, adopted a lightweight, air-cooled, general-purpose machine gun that was belt-fed. This is also 30 caliber. It's a Browning light machine gun. It was effective out 1,000 yards off of a tripod with very accurate sustained fire. About a 450 to 550 round a minute rate of fire. But normally, you fire it in short bursts, 10 to 15 rounds at a time. It prolonged the amount of time it took to overheat the weapon, thereby allowing you to keep it in service for a longer length. Well, in World War I, instead of a general-purpose machine gun, we adopted this weapon to provide automatic firepower to accompany our infantry on the battlefield. Gamers, what are we talking about here? Okay, go ahead, you're on a roll. Well, it's actually pronounced BAR, that stands for Browning Automatic Rifle. We tell everybody, okay, the bar is where the soldiers go to drink when they don't have to be on duty. This is a rifle, not a machine gun, for 2 basic reasons. Number 1, it's a shoulder-fired weapon. Number 2, it's not fed with a belt. It uses a box magazine. Also 30 caliber. So again, we've got the same basic cartridge, so it doesn't matter when we get resupplied, is the ammunition works in all of the long arms. This is a pretty heavy weapon. It's basically a 20-pound weapon without ammunition. Each 20-round magazine adds another pound to your load. You normally carry a dozen magazines plus one on the weapon on you. Usually 2 of the riflemen out of that squad carried additional ammo for you to keep that weapon in operation on the battlefield. It also had a bipod, but that was another 2 pounds to your load, and it had a tendency of getting in the way and getting hung up in close quarters. So this is the way you saw most BAR gunners carrying it on the battlefield. It was with a bipod, hard-hitting, long-range weapon, capable of hitting man-sized silhouette, man-sized targets 1,000 yards. Okay. Another weapon that was popular with the infantry, but you didn't see it in a lot of great numbers, but pretty popular for a number of reasons we're going to look at. What are we handling here, gamers? Go ahead, man.
Thompson.
Right. This is the pre-war model of the very famous Thompson submachine gun. This is the state-of-the-art, the upper end pistol caliber submachine guns of the 20th century. It also fired .45 caliber. It was considering 1940 dollar value in terms of cost of a military weapon. This was considered to be very expensive. Mass-produced M1 Garand mid-war, you can figure about $3 to $4 a rifle. You can make a lot of them and equip a lot of soldiers with them. $1940, this ran somewhere in the neighborhood of about 225 bucks. That was pretty spendy back then. It was also a very complex weapon. A lot of machine work to build those metal parts. Therefore, it was not easy to mass produce. We did, however, try to simplify the weapon a couple times. We ended up going a whole different direction to try to mass produce a submachine gun. And it was short range, football field or less, about 100 yards accurately. And it was pretty hefty, without ammunition, about 12 pounds. So here we are. I'm an infantry soldier on the front line. I already got a certain amount of gear I got to carry. And the heavier I am with my load, the slower I am on the battlefield, the longer it takes me to move over open ground. Therefore, I'm giving the enemy more time to acquire me, more time to bear a weapon on me, and making it easier for him to engage me. If you can be seen, you can be hit, and if you can be hit, you can be killed. So with those disadvantages, why would I want a heavy, short-range, high-dollar weapon that is not available in great numbers on the battlefield? Those appear to me to be three distinct disadvantages. What can you think of that would probably offset that and make it a weapon of choice if I could get my hands on it and ammo? Okay, what's your guess?
Situationally, if you were in a place where you need more muzzle control and you want to, if you were to say going into like a town,
Okay, well, it's a good short-range weapon for close combat.
and not being jarred by people with
Yeah. What is the cyclic rate of fire? Can somebody define that for me? That's how fast it shoots. This particular weapon, again, this is a class 3 firearm. This weapon with a configuration it cycles at over 700 rounds a minute. In a close combat fight, just like the young man over to my right was outlining. In a European forest, house to house, street to street, trench fighting, a big game changer. A lot of massive firepower with that heavyweight .45 caliber bullet to overwhelm an enemy defending. Okay? Okay. What you see here is the normal magazine used with this weapon, 30-round stick mag. It also came available with a shorter 20-round magazine and a larger drum magazine. There were two of those. This was a 50-round, the other one was a 100-round. Well, you know, you've seen the movie, you know, 1920s, gangster era. You got the bad guys hanging out on the side of a Packard, running down the street with a Thompson with a drum, just shooting everything in sight. Drum magazine was not very efficient military magazine. You had to take it apart, load each round individually, reassemble the mag, wind it up, and that was time consuming, and then it was kind of difficult to line it up to make sure it locked into place with a weapon. It was a complex task made more difficult by darkness, but still a pretty effective weapon. Okay, you're an infantry soldier on the battlefield. You don't have any friendly Sherman tanks to help you. The Germans start attacking and you see a tank to your front. Well, that's a pretty bad day, shape it up unless you've got a way to take care of that tank. In North Africa, we began issuing a weapon to give the infantry an ability to deal with enemy armor. Okay, we had a two-man team of soldiers that normally employed this weapon on the battlefield. That far Sphinx is your target, Gunner. Come up a little closer here.
There you go.
Yeah, and shoulder your weapon. What are we looking at, gamers? What is this weapon?
Bad news. You're right there.
What'd you say, young lady?
Say it again. Bazooka.
That's what it is.
You guys are so
That's what the
shy.
jazz call it, but it's more formally a rocket launcher. And in order to understand how this bazooka works, think of a light circuit. The stock on the shoulder held a couple of batteries. On the right side, back half of the tube, there was a metal tube that the wiring harness ran down to. There were two contacts near the breech, Brian, if you point them out. That's where the wire's connected on that. That's your circuit. The rocket round had two wires trailing out of the fins. Think of that as a light bulb. We insert it into the breech until it locked into place. The number 2 person is the assistant gunner, would attach the wires to complete the circuit. So we basically screwed the light bulb into the circuit. Well, the weapon is ready to fire, but from a point of safety and that situational awareness, we're not ready to fire until that assistant gunner tells the gunner 2 important items of information. Number 1, your weapon is ready to fire. And number 2, I'm not standing behind this weapon. It was a recoilless rifle type. It was a recoilless weapon.
Excuse the interruption. Teachers, please take your positions, and at this time,
I'm not done bazooking.
Okay,
No,
quiet,
it's
please,
okay.
so we can wrap it up here. Quiet, please. All right, so the second piece is telling the gunner that I'm not in the back of the weapon, because when that rocket fires, it goes out the front, but about a 4 to 5 foot flame comes out the back. If you were there in the wrong place when that ignited, it now becomes an issue of regular or extra crispy, but we're not talking about Kentucky Fried Chicken. So, gunner, line up on your target.
It's not me.
The far Sphinx. Now, position the 8-gunner, Brian. Now she's going to use a hand signal to let that gunner know those 2 items.
Okay, so you're gonna pretty much pop him on the back of the helmet.
Make sure he understands the message.
He's got to feel it.
Like, pretty hard.
Flat hand.
Flat aim. Like,
Keep your hand out from behind the breech.
there you go.
All right, let him know you're ready.
Gotta be harder than
Yeah, I
that.
don't think he got it. Do you?
It's a loud
All right,
battlefield.
make sure he
Shaking ground.
understands. Now at this point, the gunner will refine his sight picture, pull the trigger. Just like flipping a light switch. Current flows from the battery down to the wire, ignites the rocket, so instead of the lights going on, rocket motor ignites, effective out to about 150 yards, flame out the back, and give you some capability to operate against German armor. As the war went on, German tanks got thicker, improved armor, lost some of its effectiveness there, but it was still deadly against half-track armored cars. It was a pretty effective bunker buster, and our soldiers found out in the urban city street fighting in Germany toward the end of the war, it was a pretty effective counter-sniper weapon, because when you shot back, you just didn't have to be that close. All right, well, I appreciate your attention, your participation.
Hold on.
Have a
I
great
need a
week.
couple volunteers. Riley, Mohammed, you guys.
Josh, Joey, can you volunteer?
guys can help haul this stuff away. All right, and there'll be pizza for you. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Colonel Johnson.